Hello, my name is Benjamin Hart. I'm an American attorney and the managing director of Integrity Legal here in Bangkok, Thailand. As the title of this video suggests, we're discussing vaccine passports. I was kind of hesitant to make this video for a number of different reasons, mostly because I don't want my position on a personal level to be misconstrued, and I also understand that there's a lot of discussion going on right now with respect to the concept of vaccine passports. And it can get rather heated depending on sort of the sectors you get into on the internet or just, in society, and, what people think on this topic. It can cause a lot of polarization, a lot of consternation. The purpose of this video is not really to fan those flames. There were a number of different articles that I've read here in the past roughly week, 10 days on the overall topic. And then on top of that, I literally had no less than 4 different people in multiple different mediums. So either through, email, talking to folks in person, comments on the channel, etc., social media, who asked me point blank at multiple different times, paraphrasing, but to one degree or another, and they specifically used the term Orwell or Orwellian, when describing these vaccine passports, and they specifically asked me my thoughts. Do I think it's, kind of an Orwellian thing? And again, it was multiple different people. I'm always kind of a believer in the adage that coincidence is God winking at you. So I would decide to go ahead and make this video, mostly to kind of act as a roundup for all the talk on vaccine passports here recently. So let's go ahead and start with the print edition of the Bangkok Post. This is on Wednesday, March 3rd, 2021. The print edition, title of the article is Prayut Orders Study into COVID Passports. And I'm going to quote a couple of portions here directly. Quoting, he admitted that so far no conclusion has been reached that would guarantee the COVID-19 passport system would be effective when implemented at the international level. And we'll get into this a little bit more, but there's sort of 2 elements to this overall discussion. One is sort of in an international travel context, which we have tried on this channel to kind of keep our narration on this overall topic or discussion on this theme sort of on that main point. We're going to veer a little outside of that specific lane momentarily because there is some nuance on this that I want to get into as it pertains to how this could have a broader impact. Quoting further, the COVID-19 passport idea has been reported to have critics, especially among physicians and rights groups, who question the efficacy of the vaccines and whether or not they will be able to totally protect people against COVID-19. I thought this was interesting. They brought that up, that rights groups, etc. On top of just the efficacy issues, I've seen a lot of people that are just talking generally about notions of privacy and, travel rights, freedom, notions of due process and liberty. Not to get too deep into that again, but it's an interesting topic, this vaccine passport, because it really touches on a lot of different things. The issue of the efficacy of the vaccine, the issue of travel, how we travel, administration of travel, etc. Quoting further again from Bangkok Post print edition, articles titled Prayut Orders Study into COVID Passports. Quoting further, the National Committee on Communicable Diseases will discuss the COVID-19 vaccination passport on Monday, he said. So this specific article is talking about this in sort of a more narrow context of travel. And as we've discussed on this channel, vaccination requirements are not an unheard of thing in the context of international travel. Now, reasonable people can disagree about whether or not they are, whether or not they should be required or whether or not they are necessary. And I'm not going to get into that. That's not my point. The purpose of this video, we are talking about the issue of vaccination documentation. That, again, that's not unheard of. Different places, especially in the past, Thailand, for example, had different requirements that folks had to or were strongly recommended to have, been inoculated against certain diseases. And again, that's been around. That really, it's kind of interesting because it seems like sort of in the early to mid 90s, that seemed to fall into kind of disuse. And, the notions, with the exception of different regions of the world, but the notion of, these inoculation requirements being rather ubiquitous kind of fell by the wayside. And then it's sort of now in, these current circumstances kind of coming back, if you will. But that said, this print edition of Bangkok Post article is narrowly discussing the issue of sort of travel documents more than just sort of documentation pertaining to the vaccine itself. Then, and I thought this was interesting, this is from ThaiVisa.com. Article is titled, "Foreigners should be forced is all in caps, to have a COVID-19 vaccination, and they should pay for it." Thai poll. Quoting directly, a NIDA poll conducted last week in Thailand revealed that nearly half, I think this is interesting, nearly half of Thais think that foreigners should be forced to have a COVID-19 vaccination. Less than a third thought foreigners should, have any choice in the matter. So, first off, I always kind of remember, and again, I kind of want to bring this up. I'm trying to take a middle path here in looking at this overall topic, because I think on one side people get very worked up about it, and I can understand why. And I can understand the people that have their own concerns that perhaps there should be some documentation. There are reasonable arguments to be had on both sides. The reason I'm citing this, and I'm not trying to call Thai Visa to task or anything. There's a lot in this article, and I'm just pointing out one thing. But they said, a NIDA poll conducted last week in Thailand revealed that nearly half of Thais, nearly half, so not a majority of Thais, think that foreigners should be forced to have a COVID-19 vaccination. So clearly, there's some sensationalism going on one side of this, in one section of the cacophony on this overall topic. Well, and I'll get into this in a bit, there is a little bit of, in my opinion, perhaps, I hesitate to use the term hysteria, but lack of reflection from other sectors of the discussion on this. So I thought that was interesting. We've got this stuff talking about, could foreigners be forced to get a vaccination? And again, they're citing a poll. Every time I hear from polls, I think of Teddy Roosevelt's quote, "There are lies, damn lies, and statistics." And, so that poll, it sounds very sensational. Foreigners being forced to get a vaccination. Well, the majority of Thais, according to this article, at least the first sentence, no, they don't actually. The majority of Thais don't feel that way. Nearly half of Thais feel perhaps that way. And again, who was polled, how many people were polled, all good questions, not within the scope of this. Going a little farther afield, and again, one side of this can get a little bit overly overwrought, and then other sides of this can get overwrought. In a recent article from zerohedge.com, article was titled, "A New World Together," quote unquote, "Global airlines set to," quote, "go live in March with COVID passports in quotation marks." Quoting directly, during a Wednesday press conference, the International Air Transport Association said that they would roll out a new travel app called Travel Pass to manage COVID-19 tests and vaccine certifications. IATA is the premier global trade organization for airlines with 290 members. And we've discussed that in some length in other videos on this channel, where we discuss so-called common pass and sort of immunity passports, vaccine passports, and this sort of internationalized, kind of centralized, uniform, if you will, platform to communicate this information in a travel context. And they go into some hyperbole there in that article. Not going to get into that directly, but again, it's worth noting there's a lot of different viewpoints on this, and there are varying degrees of, again, I don't like using pejorative terms, but they're, different, there's passions get inflamed on all sides of this overall issue. And then we come to this article, and this was, again, ThaiVisa.com, and they're actually quoting the Standard, which was written in the Thai language. But this was interesting. Quoting directly, or I should say the title of this article, again, ThaiVisa.com, a passport to go to the bar, ? Intriguing possibility of, quote, vaccine passport, unquote, to visit entertainment venues in Thailand. And this is kind of where the rubber hits the road, if you will, in my opinion, with respect to where things kind of get weird with respect to the notion of vaccine passports, because you're getting out away from the specific issue of international travel, which in the context of international travel, I think there's a lot of room for discussion. Reasonable people can agree or disagree on how best to deal, especially in pandemic situations, with things. But when you're talking about domestic issues, it becomes far more for lack of a better term, the possibility for, less than optimal usage of this technology, it becomes more readily apparent. But again, how likely is it? That really should be the question. So, quoting directly, it may not be only international travel that is affected by plans being mulled and put into place in several countries for, quote, vaccine passports. Quoting further, they may have an impact on what people can do with ease domestically. Thai news site The Standard rounded up the latest situation regarding vaccine passports. Now, the latest situation, this is, as Prayut pointed out himself, they, at a government level, they haven't even made any concrete steps on this. So let's just, everybody, take a breath on all sides of this before we start presuming that, things are going to be happening in any direction. But quoting further, but as they pointed out, the so-called vaccine passport is not just for international movement. Such a document could be mandated to enter places where large numbers of people congregate in close proximity. That would mean the, quote, entertainment industry and sporting events, as the Standard pointed out. Quoting further, it might be necessary to hold a document to go to a pub, beer bar, or disco in the future. Now, again, it's all of this concerns me, at least on a personal level. I don't really like getting into personal opinions on this channel, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. We occasionally do opinion pieces on here, so I'm going to go ahead and do it on this one. All of this is concerning to me. I'm concerned about, the pandemic and the ramifications associated with that, but I'm also concerned about the right to travel, due process. It is eerie to me, the notion that one has to have any kind of document to just go about their business, day-to-day business, within a given day, or to go enjoy themselves. However, I do understand that certain things have to be balanced. That stated, I don't think it helps anybody if any side of this sort of raises passions to a fever pitch based on facts not in evidence. That's an objection, that is brought up sometimes in court. They say, those facts are not in evidence. You're just sort of bringing up something that we have no proof of. And again, as yet, Thai authorities have not really made any major decisions on this, but you would think that, tomorrow this is going to be implemented. That said, things moved very quickly at the beginning of the COVID outbreak and the pandemic, and we saw governments take action with a great deal of alacrity, far more speed than I think people really thought was possible. So it's certainly all a food for thought, but exactly where this leads remains to be seen. And I hope people maintain their sense of reason and try to come to the most optimal solution for everyone involved.